Good afternoon, guys. Today we're going to be using a slightly different setup as my mic has been stupid and it keeps wanting to get all crackly on me, so I'm recording with my webcam mic. Not certain how it's going to hold up. It has a tendency to pick up every little noise that's not me and amplify that. So we're going to try this out and hopefully I will get my mic back up and working again soon. Today I'm going to be doing a reading for you, as soon as I can find it here, there it is, of a work that I wrote in high school. It is one of the works I'm most proud of, and I really hope that you guys enjoy it, so here goes. For as long as I can remember, she had been in my life. I called her mother, but she wasn't my real mother. She only insisted that I call her that. I don't know why. I suppose you could say she was pretty, but I never thought of her that way. Her eyes were emerald green, and she had soft blonde hair that was a natural golden color you often see imitated by movie stars, though with them it always seems to come across brash looking. She had been a model in her younger days, but had given that up before I met her. I only ever saw her in business suits, and never would have known about her past career if it wasn't for the paper I had been asked to write in college on the development of photographic advertising. I was a journalism major, you see, and in my research I came across a photo of her in a magazine with a short story on her debut as a fashion model in France. But to get back to how I met her, it all started because my parents died, and what I've been told was a tragic accident shortly after I was born. I was 6 months old when that happened, and my great-grandmother took me in. I remember her only as a soft, sweet voice whispering to me as I fell asleep. My great-grandmother was a kind, sweet lady, but was too old to raise and keep up with a rambunctious toddler. So when I started walking, my great-grandmother needed some help. It was because of this that the woman I came to know as Mother was brought to me. She was originally just supposed to be my nanny, but when my grandmother died a year later, the state decided to make her my guardian. I recall some hogwash about keeping a child with someone it knows. Really, they just couldn't be bothered. One of my earliest memories was of the two of us walking down the street hand in hand, and people commenting on what a beautiful child she had. Even then, I knew she was not my real mother, but I didn't know how to voice my questions. Those early years were filled with memories of ice creams and play dates and big, elaborate birthdays. I had everything a child could need or want, and I only rarely questioned why everyone thought I was hers, and it never occurred to me to ask. At least that is, until I started grade school. My teacher, Mr. Mooney, had informed the class that next Friday was Bring a Parent to School Day. So, when I got home that night, I asked her how I could let my real mother know so she could come. I will never forget the look that crossed her face. Her face turned first white, then a sickly gray-green, and then it shone bright red, and she said defensively, "I am your real mother." "No, you're not," I said quite matter-of-factly. I was only 6½ at the time, and I hadn't learned that talking back was a bad idea. "Yes," she said, "I am, and I don't want to hear another word about it." And she pulled me to my room by my ear and tossed me on the bed and locked me in. She didn't let me out again for 3 days. That sounds really harsh, I know, but I did have a cabinet full of snacks in my room with juice boxes and the like, so I didn't go hungry or anything. And I had a bathroom that was connected to my room, too. Really, I just got lonely those days. After that, though, it seemed like every time I turned around, she was getting after me about one thing or another. She started treating me like hired help, making me do all the chores around the house, even yard work. Though, this was only when we were at home. In public, I had to play the perfect little child, so everyone would remark on what a wonderful little angel she had. She also insisted that I make top marks in all of my classes so she could brag to her friends. And of course, I learned really quickly not to make any mention of the fact that she wasn't my real mother. At home, nothing I did was good enough. Like one day, when I was 12, she came home to find me curled up in the hammock, just soaking in the sun and drawing in my sketchbook, which was my favorite thing to do even then. She didn't say anything to me right away, but then she went inside and saw I had left a cup in the dish strainer to dry, and she attacked me in a fit of rage. She came out, and before the door had a chance to slam shut behind her, she was yelling, "What do you think you're doing? After all I've done for you, is this how you repay me? I took you in, I loved for you and cared for you like you were my own child, and you disrespect me this way. I work myself to the bone every day to see that you are comfortable, and all I ask is that you do a little housework. But no, what do I come home to? Trash everywhere. Dirty dishes stacked up all over the place, laundry hampers overflowing, dust at least an inch thick. And where are you? Screwing around, being lazy, lollygagging, and drawing some occultish nonsense when your homework probably isn't even done yet." She went on like this for an hour, pausing only slightly to draw breath and then continue the bombardment. And the older I got, the worse things became. By the time I was in high school, the yelling had become so commonplace that my friends didn't even blink when she would start in on me, with no concern for their presence. They even came up with a special saying for me at school. It was all one big joke. Even the teachers were in on it. No one cared. I remember one time, the day the Johnsons moved in fact, she yelled at me so loud and with such foul language that someone actually called the cops in to investigate. They came, but they couldn't do anything. Or rather, they didn't want to. I mean, she hadn't hit me, and I saw her pass both officers a crisp $100 bill as she walked them to their car. The cops never came back again. You know, I think the only person who never accepted what she was doing was my best friend John. I didn't meet John until college, but we became great buds right away. We took all the same classes and joined all the same clubs. I told him about her, but never really thought anything else about it. I mean, that's just how it was. And then he came with me one weekend to visit her, and he was horrified. When we got back, he demanded to know just how long it had been going on. I told him. I mean, why not? Everyone else knew. No one cared. But he just couldn't accept it. You can't let her walk all over you like this. It's never going to get any better if you just keep going on like this. You've got to do something. You can't just let her get away with this all the time. It's not right. That's just what he said. But God help me, I couldn't do it. I mean, I knew he was right, that what she was doing was wrong. I couldn't bring myself to do anything about it. It had been that way for so long. Who was I to try and change things? He never let up, though. Even when I explained it to him, he wouldn't let it go. After that fateful first visit, he refused to come visit her anymore. He said he didn't want to make things worse by aggravating her with his presence. But finally, I convinced him to come with me after midterm of our junior year. He didn't want to, but I wouldn't take no for an answer. So finally we compromised. We were going to stay there one night. Only one night. And then we were going to go down to his parents' lake house for the rest of the week. I can still remember the day we were going to meet and start that little vacation. Her car was in the drive when I pulled in, but I didn't think anything of it. She often rode to work with Ann Brockstreet, who lived just down the road from us. So I parked my car as always and lugged my overnight bag down the sidewalk. The door was unlocked. And that was odd. But everything seemed okay. I mean, I didn't think the place had been robbed. She'd probably just forgotten to lock it, or maybe had left it unlocked for me, knowing that I would get there before she arrived home from work. Though, it would have been even weirder if that had been the case. And besides, I knew she wouldn't be home until precisely 5:20, and that was still 15 minutes off. I took my bag to my room and marveled at the dust everywhere. She must have fired the maid again, I thought, and shut the door behind me. It wasn't my job to do that anymore. As I walked past the dining room, I caught sight of a pile of bills on the table, and flashes of red jumped out at me from the standard black and white. Paying the bills had been my job, too. I shut the door and walked away. When I looked at the clock, I saw that it was 5:10. She would be home in 10 minutes. I knew she was going to be mad. I had only remembered to call the night before to let her know that John would be coming down with me, and she hated unexpected company. Yeah, I knew she was going to be mad, but I really didn't think anything of it, because when was that anything new? I had just enough time to fix a pot of tea before her expected arrival time, so I pulled the teapot out and set it on to boil. Tea always calmed her down, and I wanted the extra help. John wasn't with me yet. He was planning on joining me later that night. He said he needed to meet with one of his professors, something about a grade on a test or something or another. I don't really remember anymore. His train was to come in at 5:45, and I was going to pick him up 10 minutes later. I had just started to set the tea tray up when I heard the door to her room slam shut. Startled, I turned toward the noise, and the teacup flew out of my hand, shattering against the wall. I didn't even have time to regain my balance before she was there, nearly on top of me, and she was screaming. Instinctively, I took a step back from her. At first, I didn't even realize it was her. There was no trace of the kind woman from my childhood memories. This thing was something else entirely. It was a devil who looked like the woman from my memories, but was not. A she-devil sent from the demon lord himself. I couldn't even understand what she was yelling. It couldn't have been English, more like some broken dialect from the underworld. You know, I hadn't even been aware of the fact I was moving, but suddenly I felt the cold countertops pushed against my thighs. And she was yelling at me still. It was getting louder and louder, and the words she was shrieking were becoming more and more bizarre. As I watched her, her face began to shift and change. Her pupils expanded, blowing up like jet black balloons until they burst, an explosion that caused an inky black coating to cover her entire eyeball. I looked into those black depths, and I felt some magnificent force pulling me in. I didn't want to be trapped in those inky depths, so I looked away. I didn't look into her eyes again. Instead, I chose to focus on her mouth in an attempt to comprehend what she was saying. But her mouth was no longer human. It stretched from one ear to the other, with teeth that resembled fangs on a dog, more than real teeth. They were razor sharp, and they shone stark white against her lips, which were now blood red. I blinked, and she was 10 feet tall. She was bending down over me from her great height, and she screamed her garbled words into my face. Saliva dripped from her fangs, pooling in steaming vats on the sides of my mouth and along the corners of my eyes. I had to blink constantly to keep the stuff from getting in my eyes. I couldn't keep it out of my mouth, though. It tasted salty and slightly of blood. The room began to grow so hot. I couldn't hold still any longer. I knew I had to do something, that something had to be done before it destroyed me and everything around me. I felt the handle of the knife in my hand. It was cool to the touch. One small piece of sanity in a world gone to hell, and it was then that I heard those words again. You can't let her walk all over you like this. It's never going to get any better if you just keep going on like this. You've got to do something. Those were John's words. John, who always turned out to be right. John, who only wanted the best for me. This is who she really is, the voice continued. You know what must be done. Now do it. I looked down at the knife, and in its reflection, I caught sight of pure white wings that had sprouted from my back. I knew what must be done. I saw my arm move, and I felt my grip tighten. I watched as the blade hovered just barely touching the dress it was wearing, not cutting it, just grazing it. When I blinked, the thing had returned to the body of the woman I called mother, but it was a lie. I knew what it really looked like. I stepped forward, thrusting my blade deep into its stomach, and I watched as shock, confusion, and pain passed across its face. But I was empowered. This was what needed to be done. I drew back and I stabbed it again and again and again. I stabbed until it stopped crying out. I stabbed until I was covered with its blood. I stabbed as it fell to the ground, and even then I didn't stop. I stabbed it over and over and over again until I couldn't find the strength to lift the knife anymore. And then I stood up, leaving the knife in its mutilated body, and walked away. My last memory of the thing I had once known as Mother was of its green eyes, staring unblinkingly at the ceiling, and strands of golden hair catching and reflecting the light from a pool of glistening red. Her lips were smiling, like she had finally gotten what she had always wanted. I smiled too. I didn't even bother to wash the blood off my skin or to change my clothes. I just grabbed my keys and left the house. I got in my car and I drove to the train station. I didn't look back. Someone must have heard it screaming, because the cops followed me to the station. They hauled me out of my car, and they cuffed me right there in the parking lot. The shackles were cold to the touch. They reminded me of the knife I had used to stab it with. Another piece of sanity in the world. I never got to see John, or to tell him that I finally had understood what he meant, and that I had done something, that I had killed it, and that I was at peace. My job was done. It couldn't hurt anyone anymore. I'm tired of the bland black and white jumpsuit I wear every day now, and I miss the days I used to spend lying in the hammock, soaking in the sun and drawing. But I can still feel the satisfaction of stabbing it over and over again. And I can still see the blood flaking off of my skin into tiny pieces that flew around me in a brownish red cloud as they took me away, like snowflakes in a mini blizzard. How pretty it was. So that was Mother. Like I said, a piece I wrote in high school that I am super proud of. I really hoped you enjoyed it, and I look forward to your comments. Signing off now, and pachoo!